The desert stretched wide and golden under the unforgiving sun, its silence broken only by the low cry of a hawk circling above the dry mesas. Jack Weller sat outside his weather-beaten log cabin, a knife glinting in his hand as he slowly sharpened its edge. His movements were steady, unhurried, the kind of rhythm that came from a lifetime of surviving. Things most men couldn't, deep. Lines marked his face, each one a story of gunfights, broken friendships, and years of watching the horizon for something he no longer expected to come. His hat shaded eyes that had once been fierce, but now held the calm wisdom of a man who had seen death and decided to live anyway. He thought he had made peace with the quiet, with the solitude that hung around him like a loyal ghost, until that morning, when he saw the rider cutting through the heat haze. A flash of motion against the endless tan of the desert. The rider was a woman, proud and commanding, her dark hair tied in braids that whipped in the wind, white feathers woven near the ends. Her horse, a paint mare, kicked up dust as she rode straight toward him without hesitation. Jack stood, one hand resting near his revolver, not out of fear but out of habit. When she stopped a few yards from him, her sharp black eyes met his with the force of a drawn arrow. "Are you the one they call Weller?" she demanded. Her voice was firm, low, and edged with suspicion. Jack nodded slowly. "That'd be me, ma'am." "Depends who's asking." She sat tall in her saddle, her fringed buckskin dress swaying with the motion of the horse, her arms strong and marked with beaded bands. "I am Nayeli, daughter of Chief Kiona," she said. "My people's horses were stolen 3 nights ago. The tracks lead toward these hills. Tell me, Cowboy, do you ride with thieves?" Jack's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed calm. "I've done a lot in my time, lady, but I've never taken what wasn't mine." For a long moment, neither moved. The desert wind tugged at the dust between them, carrying tension and unspoken questions. Nayeli's gaze lingered on his face, measuring him. She saw the steadiness in his stance, the faint glimmer of something honest in those grey eyes. Without a word, he reached for the water canteen beside him and held it out. She hesitated, an Apache warrior accepting water from a white cowboy was no small thing, but thirst and instinct won over pride. She took it, drinking slowly, her eyes never leaving his. When she handed it back, Jack gestured to the shade near his cabin. "You can rest here a while. Desert doesn't care who you are. It burns everyone the same." She almost smiled at that, but held it back. She dismounted, her movements smooth and confident, the sun painting bronze over her skin. As hours passed, the silence between them turned from sharp to easy. Jack repaired his saddle straps, while she mended a tear in her horse's reins. Bit by bit, words began to slip through the quiet. Stories of lost family, broken treaties, and nights under open skies. She told him about her father, who died defending their lands from soldiers, about her promise to lead her people with the same fire he carried. Jack listened, saying little, only nodding as the flames from his small fire flickered in his eyes. By dusk, they shared a meal of beans and jerky, sitting close enough to feel the warmth of the same flame. Nayeli studied him, the way his hands moved with quiet strength, the way he spoke without bragging. He didn't act like the white men she'd met before, full of greed and noise. There was something different about this one, something old, almost sacred, like the land itself. "You live alone?" she finally asked. Jack poked at the fire with a stick. "I've been that way for a long time. Company doesn't stick much around here." Her voice softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "Maybe you stopped looking for it." Before Jack could answer, a gunshot cracked through the still night air. Instinct took over. Both were on their feet, rifles in hand, bodies moving in silent coordination, as if they had fought together for years. 3 riders charged down from the ridge, the very bandits Nayeli had been hunting. The night erupted into chaos, gunfire flashing through the darkness. Jack moved fast for a man his age, firing with perfect control, his aim true. Nayeli, swift as a mountain cat, circled to the side, her knife gleaming under the moonlight. When the last bandit fell, silence returned, heavy and electric. Jack stood breathing hard, smoke curling from his revolver. Nayeli's chest rose and fell, her braid loose, her eyes wide as she looked at him. "You fought like a spirit," she said in awe. Jack reloaded calmly, giving her a lopsided grin. "Guess some old dog still got bite." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile, but something deeper passed between them, a recognition, a spark. Together they buried the dead before sunrise, their movements steady and wordless. When she was ready to leave, Nayeli stood by her horse, looking at him with a strange light in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Jack shrugged, his voice rough. "You'd have done the same." She studied him for a long moment, the dawn painting gold across his face. Then she said softly, almost to herself, "Such a capable old cowboy deserves to pass on his genes." For the first time in years, Jack laughed, a deep, genuine sound that startled even him. Nayeli smiled, a real one this time, then mounted her horse and rode into the rising sun, leaving behind a swirl of dust and a silence that suddenly felt too big. Jack watched her go, the echo of her words lingering in his mind like a trail of smoke. For the first time in decades, the old cowboy wasn't thinking about the past. He was thinking about what or who might come next. Days passed after Nayeli's departure, yet her words still echoed in Jack Weller's mind like the wind whispering through canyon walls. The desert felt different now, not quieter but alive with the memory of her presence. Every morning, when he stepped out to feed his horse or check the fences, he half expected to see a plume of dust on the horizon, a signal that the proud Apache rider had returned. Instead, the world remained still, and Jack went about his chores with the uneasy restlessness of a man who realized that solitude no longer suited him. That night by the fire replayed in his mind. The bandits, the shared courage, the look in her eyes when she said goodbye. He had lived years measuring life by sunrises and sunsets. Now he measured it by the day he met her. But peace never lasted long in the West. One afternoon, as the horizon shimmered under the heat, a rider came thundering down the trail. A boy, barely grown, bleeding from a wound in his arm. Apache camp attacked. He gasped. Miners, pushing for silver veins in the North Canyon. "They're burning everything!" Jack's heart sank. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle, filled his canteen and saddled his horse. The boy tried to protest, but Jack simply said, "It ain't right to let folks fight alone." Within minutes, he was gone, the hooves of his horse pounding a rhythm of urgency across the plains. By the time Jack reached the canyon, smoke coiled in the sky like black serpents. Flames licked at the edge of the Apache settlement, and chaos filled the air, shouts, gunfire, the cries of frightened horses. He spotted Nayeli near the riverbank, leading women and children to safety. Her face streaked with soot, but her eyes burning with determination. Without a word, Jack dismounted and joined the fight. He moved through the chaos like a shadow, his rifle steady, his presence commanding. Nayeli caught sight of him, and for a brief second, her expression softened as surprise, relief, and something unspoken flashing across her face. "You shouldn't have come," she shouted. Jack fired a shot that sent a miner sprawling. "Yeah, I get told that a lot," he replied. They fought side by side as the battle raged through the canyon. Jack's sharp aim covered Nayeli's movements, while her swift strikes kept the miners from flanking their people. The ground trembled with the clash of courage and greed. Finally, as the sun began to dip low, the last of the invaders fled, leaving behind a trail of smoke and silence. The Apache people had held their ground, though at a heavy cost. Jack leaned against a rock, chest heaving, his hat gone, his face streaked with dust and sweat. Nayeli approached, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the scrape on his cheek. "You came all this way for a fight that wasn't yours," she said softly. "Didn't feel right letting you handle it alone," Jack replied. "I reckon we're both too stubborn to walk away." When night fell, the tribe gathered around the remaining firelight. Jack helped rebuild tents, shared what food he had, and spoke little. He wasn't one for grand speeches, but his quiet effort said enough. The elders, though wary of him at first, saw the truth in his actions. Nayeli sat beside him as the stars began to bloom over the canyon. "You could have stayed safe at your cabin," she murmured. Jack gazed at the stars, his voice low. "Safe's another word for lonely." "Sometimes." She didn't answer, but her silence was filled with meaning. In the following days, Jack worked alongside the Apache, helping them repair fences and train new riders. He shared what he knew about tracking, hunting, and defense, and in return, they taught him their ways and the reading of wind, the language of silence, the patience of the earth. The divide between them began to fade, replaced by a mutual understanding carved from sweat and respect. Children followed him around, curious about his worn hat and old revolver. He'd laugh, tell them stories of horses and storms, his voice carrying a gentleness none of them expected from a gunman. One evening, as the last light bled across the desert, Nayeli walked up the ridge where Jack stood watching the horizon. The wind played with her hair, carrying the scent of rain that would soon bless the dry land. "The miners will come again," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "Then we'll be ready." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading sun. "You've done more for us than many of our own allies ever did. Why?" He smiled faintly, looking out toward the line where earth met sky. "Guess a man's got to make peace with something before he runs out of years to try." They stood in silence for a while, the world around them turning gold and violet. Then Nayeli placed a hand over his, firm, steady, filled with trust. "You have the spirit of a warrior," she said. "Age does not change that." Jack met her gaze, his voice rough but sincere. "And you've got more courage in you than most armies I've ever seen." For a long moment neither spoke. The connection between them was something beyond words, forged in fire, tested in battle, and sealed by the quiet respect of two souls who had found something worth standing beside. When dawn came the next day, Jack saddled his horse again. The tribe gathered to thank him, but Nayeli stepped forward first. "Our camp is stronger now," she said, "but so are you. The desert has given you back your fire." Jack tipped his hat with a small smile. "Maybe it just reminded me what it feels like to matter." She smiled in return, the kind that carried both farewell and promise. As he rode off toward the open plains, she watched until he vanished into the horizon. Deep down, both knew their paths would cross again, and somewhere between the whispering wind and the endless sky, the legend of the old cowboy and the Apache warrior took root, not of love or conquest, but of respect, courage, and the rare moment when two distant worlds recognized each other as equals beneath the same sun.